I'm using the classic Swan MX 100MX transceiver. This is WU2D Mobile, Whiskey Uniform 2 Delta Mobile.
Whiskey Uniform 2 Delta Mobile, it's got a good signal. Where are you? This is K2ZO.
Well, I'm at the truck stop here on Route 90, just outside of Worcester.
Oh, okay. We're in northern New Jersey, so you got a good efficient system there. What's the name?
The name is Mike, Mexico, India, Kilo Echo. 100MX was the first solid-state radio that Swan did, and we're talking about 1979 vintage, maybe. Anyway, I'm on my way to the AWA conference, the Antique Wireless Association conference in Rochester, and I thought I'd put something in the car. This is a mini Hustler setup. Basically, I took a 75-meter Hustler tip, and then instead of using the big 4-foot mast under it, I've got a little 3-foot piece of PVC with a helical wind on it. So it's kind of like a miniature mobile antenna, guys. Over.
Oh, very good, John. Go ahead. Yeah, I can copy you here in Wayne, New Jersey. Didn't copy 100% of it. You were fading a little bit, but I get a good copy of you. Running about 200 watts into an end-fed antenna.
Okay, 200 watts into the antenna. Very good. Anyway, I'm going to get underway here. I think I set off a car alarm. This is the Swan 100MX transceiver. It's a first-generation 5-band solid-state transceiver from the late 70s, early 80s. And this is similar to a lot of rigs that were developed during the 70s as solid state came on. It has a rudimentary SWR fold-back circuit that protects it from burning itself out with high SWR. And it's a relatively easy to use radio. I'm going to put this in the car for a little trip out to the Antique Wireless Association conference in Rochester, New York. So that's like it's like a 5-hour drive, and this will give me something to do on the way. I'm thinking about 15 meters. So I'm designing a mount that will allow me to put a ham stick on the car temporarily. And I had a mount designed for a bumper situation on my older car, but the new car has a dual exhaust, and I didn't go to the trouble of putting a bumper hitch on it, so I had to kind of make a mount that would go on somehow. I was thinking of a trunk lid mount, I was thinking of the tri-magnet mount, but then I remembered I had my kayak racks on top, which are just bar racks for the J-type hooks that are used for kayaks. And I thought, well, why don't I just slip that on the rear passenger rail, kind of on the outside. And so I formed a little antenna mount. I'll show it to you. Nothing fancy. But this is a weldment that a friend of mine, Andrew, put together for me for the bumper hitch. And I just chopped it. And I've put a clamp arrangement on it that will clamp it onto the outside of the bar. I have a heavy spring here, which I think will work good with the ham stick. I like the idea of having a spring. And we'll try to put this transceiver in the car. Now I have one little issue. I did not have a microphone for the transceiver. So I found this Shure 527C. This is a beautiful hand mic. But the only problem with the Shure, it requires voltage. So rather than modifying the radio to add bias to the microphone input and then wiring up the plug, which I'm prepared to do, I have a stereo plug that I'm going to wire for this. Instead of going in there, I thought it would be a little more expedient for this trip just to mount a 9-volt battery to the side on a convenient screw that keeps one of the covers on. This is a 9-volt battery holder. And then I will kind of rig it so the bias goes into the connector, the back of the connector, and that's going to power the microphone. No current is drawn until you hit the PTT button. It has a separate keying and power application closure inside, so I won't be wasting any power out of the battery. So a temporary situation for the Shure microphone. Let's see how that works. It's actually a dynamic element that has a preamplifier built into the case of the microphone. So it is a powered dynamic microphone with an amplifier. And this guy also has pretty strict voice shaping. So it has a pre-emphasis curve that increases the frequency, increases the sensitivity as you go up in frequency. Most communications audio for the human voice is between 2,000 and 4,000 hertz. So this guy, it's tailored for voice communications. So I think this is going to work really well with the Swan 100 MX transceiver. So the little radio is hooked up to the amplifier. I just wanted to do a quick test. Solid-state radios are notoriously poor at driving these old-fashioned linears. And this is a first-generation solid-state radio. I've got it so that when you key the mic, it's like it's in the CW position. So both the key and the microphone go in the same jack in this radio. It's very simple. You just plug in a regular key. And now to do that, that meant that tip had to be the key line. So just remember that when you're wiring up a microphone, tip is the key line and ring is the audio. So sometimes that's backwards on a lot of radios. So when I key it, I'm surprised. I'm getting over 400 watts driving this amplifier. That's doing quite a nice job into the amplifier. I loaded it here on 15 meters. Now it's not as good as the old tube radio at driving the amp, but that's not bad for a solid-state radio. It's over 400 watts out. I better put the other dummy load on there. I'm going to burn up this resistor, so stand by. Whiskey Uniform 2 Delta. Whiskey Uniform 2 Delta, you're 5 and 9 here in New Hampshire. 5-9 here in New Hampshire. I'm hitting the mic a little bit too hard. How copy over there?
Again, you copy Mike. You copy Mike. Very good. Uniform. Great. Nice to meet you again. It's a call for you for 58, was it?
Yeah, very good. Thank you for the 58. Just bringing a little solid-state radio up here. Not running too much power at all. Right on a little battery. This is WU2D, and you got the handle correct as Mike. Over. Yes, happy weekend. 73s, good DX.
And you're calling the DX from 15 or Security Sierra Victor, number 2, Hotel Juliet, Quebec. Please only DX outside Europe.
So this is my battery, trickle charger, tender, whatever you want to call it. Nothing super exotic. Basically, it's a pair of LM117 in the TO220 package. Each one of them is programmed to 1 amp. So this can supply up to 2 amps to the lead-acid battery. And in the tip of the cigarette lighter plug, I have a pair of Schottky diodes. Basically, that's just protection so that the battery that's powering the radio doesn't try to power the car. So it goes one way out of the cigarette plug into this box and then into the battery I'm using on the radio. Now, I recognize that this is not going to be very active unless the battery goes below probably 12 volts significantly. But that's the idea. Also, this will help during normal receive to handle the 100, 200, 300 milliamps it takes to power the radio. But it's more or less just a trickle charger for the battery. It's not a real intelligent tender. It simply current limits to 2 amps, so we're not going to blow up the cigarette plug or pop the fuse. So the simple limiter box, it has an LED on it that tells you when there's power. Okay, here's the mount. I've just got it on the side of my kayak bar. Just a simple clamp. This is the ground. Now this ground is going to have the ground of the coax. It may actually have the ground of a matching section. And of course it has the main chassis ground that goes to the car. Now in order to guarantee that I'm getting a good connection to the car, I went a little crazy and I actually put in a small screw right here. So I did have to drill a hole into the car to get a good ground at that point. And then I doubled that up. So I'm doubling up the ground by going into this bolt that goes right into the frame that's in back of the rear seat. So it's a double ground setup, and then I'm taking the excess and throwing it back into the trunk, and I'll close this. And that seat will hold this up and out of the way. Everything will be wonderful with this heavy-duty ground. Ground is very important with the mobile antenna. You've got to make sure you're attached to the car. I'm not messing around with the coax either. You know, back in the 70s, using RG58 in the car was fine. And frankly, it worked fine at 75 meters and 40 meters and so on. But why mess around? It's only about 15 or 20 feet of wire in the car at the most. So I'm using LMR 240 Ultraflex. It's a little more expensive, but again, we're only talking about a 15-foot chunk of it. This is double shielded and ultra low loss and very flexible. Okay, here's a few tips that I've learned over the years for mobile operation. And you real mobile operators, take it easy on me. The best way I have found for reducing ignition noise is simply to use a separate battery. Stay isolated from the car's power system as much as you can. Now I realize some of you want a trickle charge. You can do that, but you may find that the trickle charger itself introduces noise, so only attach it when you actually need to charge the battery. I use a battery in the back seat, but it could be put in the trunk and secured and so on. Next, I try to tempt fate by putting the base of the antenna as high and as centered on the vehicle as possible. Get that antenna up in the air, very few obstructions with a good ground plane. Yes, I know this is a bit scary, and you may need monofilament guy lines for the mast section, and you may look pretty funny going down the road. But rather than just depending on capacitance, as with those large magnetic attach base systems, even if you do that, back it up with heavy braid directly to the car's rooftop somehow through a grounding system. Most antennas will present an okay SWR below 2 to 1, pretty much just as is. But if you want to get it better, then you may need a matching device like a capacitor or an inductor shunt section at the base of the antenna. I like the simple auto transformer match because it directly grounds the antenna, thus killing another common mode ground pickup source. You know, the entire length of the coax, do you finally find ground at the radio? That's not a good idea. Double shielded low loss cable. This helps to get the signal out no matter what the match is. Nice low loss cable. And don't be afraid to use some magic ferrite beads here and there on the coax and the power cables. The center loaded whip, whether discrete, you know, as in the bug catcher, or integrated into a section like with the Hustler or the screwdriver antenna, really, even the helical whips are center loaded. You'll notice that the tight winding is in the middle of those whips. The hamstick places the bulk of the inductance in the center. And this center loading, as it's called, is a winning strategy for getting the most current in the base of the antenna, thus the most radiation. A large capacity hat has also been shown to increase the radiated power and increase the current in the whip. But it's actually the location of the antenna on the vehicle that will dominate your performance. If you can get that antenna higher and in the clear, even when you're using a simple antenna like a hamstick or a shark, they're going to perform beautifully, even if they lack the classic features of the most high-performance mobile antenna types. You know, the large capacity hat, the giant rod low-loss mast, the huge center-loaded coil inductor, and so on. Basically, that clearance that you get by putting it high, the ground plane structure being smoother and lack of obstruction, that just that height itself is going to win. Auto-tuning systems are very handy for the serious mobile operator, but most of us can get away with those quick disconnects that they have for the helical whips. What about the radio? Your mobile radio. You notice I'm using a very old and simple analog radio, the Swan 100MX. But it has the two most important features that any mobile operator needs. One, a good RF gain control, and two, a noise blanker that really works. Once you have established your noise level on a particular band and antenna system, rotate the RF gain control until you start to get into the noise floor. That's going to make the meter probably settle towards the middle, and you'll notice it's just sitting there. Signals that are stronger will, of course, make the meter deflect upward. But at least with the older transceivers, as you decrease the RF gain control, the meter will start to come off the floor and it'll go to a set level. So this noise reduction technique, by lowering the RF gain, along with the noise blanker, will keep you from going absolutely nuts in the car with a lot of useless noise.
W0 Whiskey Papa from Whiskey United 2 Delta Mobile. Sorry about the Mobile confusion.
Yeah, that's all right, Mike. Yeah, you're 5'9", over.
Yeah, I'm just using that micro stick, you know, the little tiny mini whip, you know, for the car for 15 meters that Shark makes.
Yeah, okay, real good. Well, it's doing a nice job for you. Real fine. I'm looking at your Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Go ahead.
Very good. Well, thank you for letting me in. It's a little bit tough with this little tiny antenna. I'm using a classic Swan MX100 transceiver. This is Swan's last gasp, and it's a probably 1979 vintage. 73s. Well, thanks for letting me in. WU2D Mobile.
Yeah, okay, no problem, Mike. Yeah, a little confusion there, wasn't it? Whiskey United 2 Delta Mobile. W0 Whiskey Papa. Well, safe driving there, Mike. Take care. Bye-bye.
See you later. Work some DX. WU2D.
Yeah, no problem there. Thank you, calling. Thank you. Thank you, 15. This is Whiskey 0, Whiskey Papa. Washington 0, Washington, Portugal, calling. Thank you.
So I'm going mobile here on the New York State Thruway, and I'm running the Swan MX100, the old vintage transceiver. I'm using the Mini Shark, the 15-meter micro vertical. It's a little tiny antenna, but lots of DX coming in, good conditions.
Very good, Phil. Thank you ever so much. Your rig and antenna doing a great job. I'm running 500 watts as well to an inverted V and an inverted V wire antenna. A very 73 to you. All the very best to you and your family on this beautiful day. And enjoy the propagation as well. I want WSF 73 from W6GT. Ciao, ciao, Leo. 73. Ciao. What is that looking? North America, India. 1 Whiskey, Sierra, Mike. Roger, Roger, copy. 59 Michigan, take your lead up for 15 meters, 73. All right, 0, Delta 9, Delta 2, Tango, come back. Roger, copy. 57, also 57, intersection, man, take your lead up, and you know, 15, heavy. 73, George, 70, go Charlie 5, Hotel, Whiskey, front here.
Whiskey United 2 Delta Mobile. Whiskey United 2 Delta Mobile.
Whiskey United 2 Delta Mobile, 52, 52.
You're 55, 55 on the New York State Thruway. Over.
Okay, copy 55 New York State Freeway. Always good work, mobile station. Thanks for being out there.
So in part 2, I'm going to kick it off with the tuning techniques. How do we tune up these mobile antennas? There's a lot of different methods, a lot of folklore. Also, as I continue my adventure, I'll be arriving at the AWA conference, where they have a lot of presentations, as well as an auction that has some fabulous items for sale that you can bid on. And then I make a trip down to the AWA Museum. So stand by for part 2 of Mikey's excellent adventure.